Why do some of us love villains? From the oldest myths humanity has told to the stories we watch today, emotions have always shaped the way we understand the world. Love builds civilizations, while fear preserves them. If you open one of the oldest surviving works of literature, the very first words don't speak about heroes or destiny. It literally begins with a command: sing, goddess, the rage of Achilles. Not courage, not honor, but rage. Because anger itself has always been one of the most powerful narrative forces ever written. It turns tension into conflict, conflict into transformation, and sometimes transformation into tragedy. But in modern storytelling, specifically in anime, anger takes many other forms. It becomes ideology. Some villains are not evil because they enjoy suffering. They're evil because they believe they have found the solution for it. Askeladd, Pain, Meruem. Three villains who represent something far more dangerous than simple hatred, a worldview, a belief about what humanity is and what it should be. And the reason these villains stay with us far after the story has finished is because somewhere, deep down, we understand exactly how someone can become them. Before we talk about the characters themselves, we need to understand something about how villains are written. The most powerful villains in storytelling are not chaotic monsters. They're characters who look at the same world as the hero, but reach a complete different conclusion. In mythology, this structure appears constantly. Achilles' rage shapes the Trojan War. Gilgamesh begins his journey as a tyrant king long before confronting mortality. Even Lucifer, in many theological interpretations, is not simply evil. He is rebellion against divine order. These figures don't just oppose the protagonist, they challenge the moral framework of the story itself. And modern anime uses the exact same structure. But instead of divine rebellion and mythic pride, the villain often begins with something much more human. In Naruto, Pain represents one of the clearest ideological villains in anime, and the terrifying part about Pain's philosophy is that it begins with something completely understandable: loss. You see, Nagato wasn't born a monster. He was born a child in a war-torn country, a country constantly used as a battlefield by stronger nations. He watched his parents die, he watched his friends die, and he watched this cycle repeat endlessly. And eventually he came to a conclusion that many philosophers throughout history reached: humans never learn through reason, they only learn through suffering. Pain's ideology is built on a brutal truth. True peace can only exist when the cost of war becomes unbearable. So his solution is pretty simple: create a weapon so devastating that the world will experience suffering on an undeniable scale. And once humanity understands that pain, they will fear war enough to avoid it. It's essentially nuclear deterrence taken to a philosophical extreme. And this is what makes Pain such a powerful villain, because historically he isn't entirely wrong. World War II ended with a nuclear devastation, and the fear of those weapons created years of uneasy peace. You see, Pain doesn't want chaos. He wants stability, but stability turned into fear. And this is the terrifying logic behind ideological villains. They believe the world is broken, and they also believe that they are the only ones willing to fix it. If Pain represents ideological extremism, Askeladd represents something else entirely: pragmatism. In Vinland Saga, Askeladd is technically an antagonist for most of the story. He kills Thorfinn's father, he constantly manipulates people, and he leads Viking raids. But unlike many villains, Askeladd never pretends to be morally righteous. He understands exactly what kind of world he lives in, a world defined by conquest and survival. And within that world, morality becomes a luxury. And what makes Askeladd fascinating is that his philosophy is not about changing the world. It's about navigating it as it is. He lies when necessary, kills when necessary, as well as manipulates kings and warriors alike. But everything he does ultimately serves a larger purpose: protecting Wales, the literal homeland of his mother. Unlike Pain, Askeladd doesn't believe that humanity can be saved. He believes that humanity is inherently flawed, cruel, as well as short-sighted. And the only way to survive in such a world is to become smarter than everyone else in it. In many ways, Askeladd resembles many figures from ancient mythology. Characters like Odysseus, warriors who don't only survive through strength alone, but through cunning and calculation. And his final act, killing the king to secure Canut's rise, reveals the true nature of his character. He was never truly fighting for power, but instead he was fighting for legacy. The king of the Chimera ants in Hunter x Hunter, and perhaps one of the most profound villain arcs ever written in anime. Meruem begins his story with a philosophy that almost appears biological: the strong rule the weak, and humans are inferior to creatures. They're seen as livestock. From a purely evolutionary perspective, his reasoning is not irrational, because nature itself operates on this principle: the strong survive, yet the weak perish. But Meruem's story isn't about domination, it's more about transformation, because absolutely everything changes when he meets Komugi, a blind girl who repeatedly defeats him in a board game. And through these interactions, Meruem begins to encounter something he never expected, which is humanity. Not strength, not power, but vulnerability, compassion, as well as connection. And slowly, the king who once saw humans as cattle begins to question the very foundation of his ideology. If such a fragile life and a blind human can hold such value, then perhaps strength is not the ultimate measure of worth. And by the end of the story, Meruem doesn't die as a conqueror. He dies as something else entirely. A being who discovers humanity moments before losing everything. And that transformation is what makes his character unforgettable. You see, Pain believes suffering creates peace. Askeladd believes survival requires ruthlessness. And Meruem begins believing that strength determines value before discovering compassion. Three complete different philosophies. But they all share one important trait. They force us to question something undeniable. What if the villain is not completely wrong? Because the truth is that ideologically, villains represent something very real about human history. Every major conflict humanity has ever fought was always justified by someone's philosophy. Empires believing they were civilizing the world, revolutions believing they were deliberating it. Even atrocities have been committed by people that were literally convinced they were doing the right thing. And that's what makes ideological villains so powerful. They're not monsters. They're mirrors. And the reason characters like Pain, Askeladd, and Meruem remain so memorable is because they represent different responses to the same question. What do you do when you realize the world is broken? Because some people try control it, some try survive in it, and some try changing it entirely. And this makes you realize that the most dangerous villains are not the ones who enjoy destruction, but they're the ones who believe that destruction is necessary. Because when someone truly believes that they're saving the world, there is almost nothing they won't justify. And that's what makes these villains so powerful. Not their strength, not their cruelty, but the terrifying possibility that under the right circumstances, absolutely any one of us can become them.